Thanks everybody for coming out today. This is our first Tech Talk ever on Component Center, so we're excited to get this out. Component Center has been in general availability since about beginning of January of this year. Um it is a fairly new service to our ProjectWise 365 stable of services. And a couple of things that I wanted to point out before we actually start demoing it. First and foremost, Component Center is instant on. So every IMS-based organization, that means any connected organization that Bentley knows about, actually has access to Component Center. And you don't have to call anybody. You really just have to go to connect.bentley.com and go to your services and you will see Component Center down there. If you want to administer Component Center and allow other colleagues to begin to add components to it and use our clients, all you really have to do is go to your organization and go to your Roles and Permissions tab. And in your Roles and Permissions tab, what you will find is the Define Roles button that you can use to create a role that has any number of the Component Center permissions assigned to it. I would suggest that you create several different types of roles with a mix of read, write, upload, and approve. With regards to what those actually mean, let's go ahead and have a look at that very quickly. One of the other things I want to point out about Component Center when you get here is that we have online help available to you. So you can click our help button. It will bring you directly to our community's help, where you will find information about how to create, navigate, and edit and use these things in design. You will also find an area on configuring roles and permissions so that you can set up your own roles and permissions with a couple of different sets of permissions, so you can have read-only and administrators as well. And we've also included brand new some tutorial videos for you to go through as well. So all that's available directly from the Component Center interface. So a couple things about Component Center, the service itself. It's file agnostic. So we don't really care what you tell us as a component. We will store that away as a component for you and let you manage it in the same way. Obviously, we work very well with design formats. So for instance, parametric DGNs, regular DGNs, cell libraries, RFAs from Revit, and DWGs are supported inside of Component Center, and we're expanding that as we go. However, you can feel free to store anything as a component. In fact, I was talking to some clients yesterday who were interested in storing IPTs from Inventor. And while we don't have any direct integration to Inventor, you can create IPT-based components and manage them in much the same way you would with DGNs. The only thing that won't happen is you just won't get an automated thumbnail. However, you're able to upgrade your thumbnails on any component inside of here manually when you don't get the thumbnail you expected. This is all self-service, so you're able to create your own filters, meaning you can create your own catalogs, you can create your own categories, manufacturers, and applications. Those are all configurable per organization and also guarded by permissions as well. The states that come with Component Center are fixed. Everything that comes in when we first upload a component comes in as draft, whether we're uploading it here from our admin portal or from one of our clients. We do that intentionally so that you have somewhat of an approval workflow to go through. We try not to make it an extremely onerous workflow to get through, but you at least have to come through and mark things as published if you want them to be consumed in the design files themselves. I mentioned that everything is self-service. You can go to our applications, our catalogs, our categories, and our manufacturers pages to create any of these lists or edit what you have in terms of catalogs and manufacturers. So let's talk about creating a component. Creating a component in Component Center is actually pretty simple. You just go to our Create Components button and you upload a design file. So in this case, I'm going to go upload a couple of MicroStation files here. And you'll see that because I'm selecting a couple of them, my name is already blanked out. It will pull the name directly from the component file. I can choose to add a category, an application, and a manufacturer from this, or I can let the Intelligent Web Jobs for DGNs and RFAs select that for me. I'll go ahead and make sure that I use a consistent name here. So we'll put Victaulic in here. Now, one of the things about Component Center that we didn't want to get into is we didn't want people to have an extremely verbose mapping problem in front of them. We wanted them to be able to start creating components without having to map into some grand schema or anything like that. So what we did instead was we gave you the capability to further classify components simply by tagging them. So if you thought of hashtags on social media, that's exactly what this is like. I can come to any component and I can start tagging it with any value I want to, and that's going to be available when I go to search for this component either here in the admin portal or down in the clients. So the butterfly valves. You'll notice that it's trying to put it into my check and approval catalog here, and that's because I've said that my check and approval catalog is my default catalog. In this case, I already have a valves catalog, so I'll just tell it to put it in my valves catalog. By the way, the default catalog for uploads can be configured by organization as well. So now what it's doing is it's uploading those DGNs, it's opening them up in a web job in the background, it's extracting thumbnails for me, it's extracting engineering data for me, and it's creating 2 brand new components for me. And if I ever want to know what's going on with my web jobs, I can go to my job management page here, and I can see that these 2 are already done. I just uploaded them. They've been extracted, they've been uploaded, and they've been created. So if I go back now to my valve catalog, you'll see that I have a couple of valves here that have come in recently that are in draft state. And these are the new ones that we just added. This butterfly valve happens to be one of them. If I want this to be available to my designers on my desktop who have access to my valve catalog, I can simply highlight that and I can edit its properties and mark it as published. Once I do that, that valve is now available to be placed in design. So let's go back and look a little bit more in depth at some of our component properties. So if I go look at electrical, for instance, and we look at this switchgear from Siemens, you'll see that it's got its own thumbnail. I can change the thumbnail out. It's published. It's been tagged a couple of times. It knows what application it should go to. You'll notice that it has a design file associated with it, and that design file in this case happens to be an RFA. And because it's an RFA, it's going to have potentially variations inside of it, meaning that there's going to be 3 or 4 different versions of this switchgear that could be placed during design. If we look at it, it also has some reference files associated to it and reference URLs. Now, you're free to do this with any component inside a Component Center. You can attach PDFs, Excel files, any sort of document that you want to enhance or add to the information that you know about this component. Not only can you do that with files, but you can also do it with URLs. And you can see that in this case, what I did was I've taken the product description, the place where Siemens is actually hosting the PDF about this, and I've added it to it so that I can get to this or my designers can get to this simply by clicking open link and going directly to that website. So that works for any well-formed HTTP link. It also works, by the way, for ProjectWise links as well. So if you're storing information in ProjectWise about a component, whether it's MSDS sheets, installation diagrams, even materials information about how to install it, you can link that directly to any component inside of here. One thing I do want to mention too, and this is sort of important, is that everything that I'm demoing today is built on top of a well-documented API. So there's no logic in our UI. We build our APIs first, we test them, and then we build our UI on top of it. And that's available to you if you wanted to extend it by creating some of your own solutions with Component Center. So let's go take a look at this now in the MicroStation environment. If I open up MicroStation here, you can see that I have a couple of options. I can either place component or I can add component. Placing component lets me go to the web, find a component, and place it in my design. Add component lets me take a design that I'm working on and actually publish it up from the desktop to Component Center. It will go in as draft, so it will need to be approved by an administrator, but then it can be placed in a catalog and it can be available to other designers. So I'm going to hit the Place Component button, and you'll see that we have our electrical switchgear here. You can see that I have the ability to see the PDFs and URLs associated with it. I have the properties that came with it. Notice that when we look at this, I have all of the properties that came from, all those rich properties that came from Siemens. So when Siemens defined their RFA, they gave us just loads of great engineering information in it. And that's extracted, so you can see it here on the desktop. And I'll just go back here very quickly. You can also see all of the variations and that rich data here in the admin portal as well. Notice that I can select a variation that I want to place inside of here. I'll just take the first variation and place it, and we'll pop it down here into our design. And now if I go look at the properties for this, you'll see that we got our geometry, and we also got all of that rich data that came from Siemens originally, now embedded inside of our design. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is as we put these components into design, specifically when you're using some of our clients, like our MicroStation add-in or our Revit add-in, we put a breadcrumb in here. And the reason we put a breadcrumb in here is because we want you to be able to extend this with your own solutions. We're going to extend it currently with our component analytics so that we can tell you how often a component has been downloaded, how often a component's been placed, and we want to get to the point where we're actually telling you where inside of design files that component currently exists, so that you'll be able to have a look at the versions that are out there in your designs and compare that against the versions that are currently available via Component Center. So I can place that RFA here inside of MicroStation, and I will show you that if I open up Revit, I can also place the exact same RFA inside of Revit, and I will have very similar geometry and very similar properties available to me. While Revit's opening up, one of the things that I did want to point out, and I mentioned just briefly, is these components can be versioned, right? So one of the things that I can do with, and I will just take any component here, I can take this design file and I can say, I have a new version of this design file, and I want to upload that new version and replace the version that's sitting there right now. And I can select any design file that I want to replace that, and what will happen is when I replace that, it will open it up, it will re-extract the thumbnail, it will re-extract the engineering data, and it will create a brand new version of this for me. And you can see that in this case, I've already done this once with this particular set of switchgear. And you can see that this is the design file that is now representing the component that we could place in design. However, we used to use this design file as the component, and it was replaced and uploaded. It was replaced on Friday the 19th. If for some reason I've made a mistake, or if for some reason I want to revert back to an older version, I can always select that and promote this back to the original version. When I do that, it will crank a web job up, it will replace the thumbnail, replace the engineering data, and it will make this design file, the primary design file, to be placed in our designs. So I'll go back to Revit, and I will open up a Revit file very quickly. You'll notice we have a Component Center add-in here, and I have a couple of options here in Revit. One of them is load. So one of the things that I can do is I can load an entire family in here. So if I click load, I can pick a different set of switchgear here, and I believe, well, let's see, let's find one with multiples. There we go. There's our original. You can see that this has 3 variations inside of it. I can select all of them, and I can click load. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull that design file down from the cloud. It's going to upgrade it, as Revit does whenever it has to. And it's going to load that directly into my design. So when that's finished, I will actually have switchgear from Siemens sitting inside of my design, ready for me to place, right? If I don't want to load it, if I just want to place a particular variation, I can always go pick a variation very quickly and just place it inside of there. So I will click place, and I will place this one directly into here. So you have a couple of options for how you work with Component Center. And we do try to, when we do our add-ins, we try to integrate them in ways that are meaningful to that design experience. So that's why we've given you the capability to actually go ahead and load things when you want to load them, place them directly when you want to place them. You'll notice that you can also open something up. So in this case, if I wanted to, I could start a brand new RFA session. I could open an RFA from Component Center. I could modify that, and then I could use the upload feature to take that RFA and publish it back up to Component Center as a new proposed component. So finally, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that you'll see inside of some of my catalogs that some of my components actually have logos associated with them. And what we're starting to do, and Component Center, again, is a relatively new service, is we're starting to publish some branded catalogs so that as we get agreements with manufacturers, we post their catalogs and host their catalogs here for them, and then you, as your organization catalog or library administrators, are able to go to that manufacturer's data and actually pull it directly in. So in this case, you can see that I can go to brands, and I can select from Siemens Building Technology, and I can begin to take some of these, and I believe this is HVAC if I'm not mistaken, but I can begin to take some of these components directly from Siemens catalogs, and I can add them to my own. So I will add them to my HVAC catalog. And when I want to see what's going on there, I can always go to job management to see what the status is. Basically what's happening right now is it's copying 4 components from a published Siemens catalog directly to my catalogs. So if I come back here and I start looking at my HVAC catalogs, you'll see that I now have Siemens components showing up inside of here, right? And those components are now available to my designers to be placed inside of design. So if we go back to Revit, I pulled those over from Siemens just a second ago. Let's go look at our HVAC. And I believe these are RFAs. Yes, they are. Cool. So here's one that we just pulled over, and I can now place that directly in design, right? And we get all the wonderful data that comes with it from Siemens, just as they normally do when they're creating their components. So, a couple of advantages here that you get just automatically with Component Center. It's instant on. There's nothing for you to have to configure in terms of being able to start storing your information. The only thing you have to do is start defining catalogs and categories and manufacturers and applications that you want to associate with these components, and then you're able to start loading the same design files that you use today in MicroStation and OpenRail and OpenRoads and Civil 3D, and you're able to start managing those directly from here. The other thing that I would mention is that it spans beyond the Bentley ecosystem. So we are intentionally building a system that lets you manage your components across your design systems and across your disciplines, right? If you look out there today, there are several commercial models or commercial offerings that let you do content, or BIM content management is what it's generally called. But in almost every case, those solutions are very Revit centric. We already have Revit, we already have MicroStation, we already have OpenRoads, OpenRail, and OpenSite integrated into here. We have a Civil 3D add-in coming out. We'll be posting that next week, and we're looking for new ideas on where to go next. I will tell you that I've had several requests for Inventor show up and be able to actually have an add-in for Inventor. So we may be looking at that. We'll see. Other than that, I think that's pretty much my my demo and my talk on Component Center. It's actually a pretty easy service to get started with. It's a pretty easy service to use. It's well documented, and it spans across a lot of the tools that you already use today.